I didn't throw a fit. I didn't scream or break plates or burn wedding photos. I just quietly took off my wedding ring, placed it on the nightstand, and walked out of that life like I was slipping out of a dress that never quite fit right. No one saw it coming. Least of all my husband. We'd been married for 8 years. People thought we were solid. He had the good job. We hosted the barbecues. We sent out Christmas cards with matching pajamas and wine-stained smiles. But behind all that was a house full of silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that screams in your bones when you're lying in bed next to someone who doesn't know how to hold you anymore. If he ever did. But this isn't really about my ex-husband. Not entirely. This is about the man who noticed me long before I realized I was invisible. His name is Jonah. Yes. He's my ex-husband's brother. The first time I met Jonah, it was at our engagement dinner. He walked in late. Wind in his hair, sunglasses still on, like he had just come from somewhere wild. He kissed me on the cheek and said, "So you're the one who's marrying the big guy, huh?" I smiled politely. He grinned like he already knew something I didn't. Over the years, Jonah was always around but never intrusive. The charming uncle to our non-existent children. The one who brought wine that didn't taste like soap. Who stayed late to help clean up after parties. Who looked me in the eyes when I spoke like he was actually listening. That alone felt like oxygen. He saw me. And I don't just mean he noticed when I got a haircut. He saw the way my smile would tighten when my husband interrupted me. He saw the way I lingered at the sink just to avoid going back to the couch. He saw how I always laughed 2 seconds late. And one day, he started asking questions. Nothing inappropriate. Just, "You okay?" But in a voice that made it feel safe to say no. I never said no. But I also never said yes. I remember one night in particular. It had rained all day. My husband had come home drunk from a client meeting. He passed out in the living room with ESPN blaring at full volume. I turned off the TV, tucked a blanket over him out of habit, and went to the kitchen. Jonah was already there, drying the dishes I'd left earlier. He turned and said, "Rough night." I nodded. He handed me a glass of wine. We sat at the table and just talked. About music. He loved Springsteen. About books. He hated Hemingway but loved Toni Morrison. About the city. How it felt like everyone was chasing something they didn't really want. I told him I used to paint. He asked me why I stopped. I said life got in the way. He looked at me and said, "You sure it wasn't someone else's life that got in the way?" That hit me hard. I laughed it off. But later in bed, next to the snoring body of the man I had promised forever to, I thought about that question. Lot. Jonah never crossed a line. Not once. He never touched me. Never flirted. But he made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. Like I mattered. Like I was more than someone's second thought. I started to dread family dinners. Because it was getting harder to pretend I didn't feel the pull. But it was never about sex. It was about being seen. And that's a dangerous kind of intimacy. Because once you've felt it, everything else tastes like cardboard. Then one morning, my husband looked at me across the breakfast table and said, "You should wear more makeup. You look tired lately." That was it. A click. The quiet moment when something deep inside me just snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just realized that I didn't want to be married to someone who thought I was prettier when I wasn't me. So I waited. 2 weeks. Made a plan. Found an apartment. 1 bedroom. Mall. But mine. The day I left, I made coffee like normal. Packed 1 bag. Left my ring on the nightstand. Wrote a note that said, "Don't call. I'm not coming back." And I walked out barefoot. Into the morning light. No drama. No goodbye party. Just peace. I turned off my phone for 3 days. When I turned it back on, there were missed calls from him. From my mother. Even from friends I hadn't spoken to in months. But one text stood out. From Jonah. It said, "I heard. Hope you're okay." That's all. Just 10 words. But they held me like a blanket. They didn't demand. They didn't judge. They just saw me. I didn't respond right away. But every time I read that message, I felt a little less alone. A week passed. Then 2. Then Jonah messaged me again. He sent a song. Vienna by Billy Joel. He said it reminded him of me. I listened to it in the bathtub. Cried until the water went cold. Because I had finally stopped running. And started listening to myself. People say it's brave to leave a marriage. But for me, it felt like finally telling the truth out loud. The truth that I wasn't happy. That I had stayed out of fear. That I had become a stranger to myself. And that maybe, just maybe, there was more waiting for me out there. Something honest. Something kind. Something like Jonah. He didn't chase me. Didn't show up with flowers. He just kept showing up with softness. Message here. Photo there. One day he sent me a picture of a bookstore. Said it reminded him of the kind of place I'd open someday. I hadn't even told him about the bookstore dream. But of course he knew. He always knew. 3 months after I left. He asked if I wanted to grab coffee. Just coffee. Said yes. I didn't wear makeup. I didn't dress up. I just showed up. As me. And when I walked into that cafe and saw him, it felt like breathing for the first time in years. He didn't say anything dramatic. Just smiled. And said, "Hey." But the way he said it, I could have melted. We talked for hours. About everything. And nothing. We laughed so much the barista had to ask us to keep it down. And when we stepped outside into the cold evening, he looked at me. Like he had something to say. But instead, he reached for my hand. And I let him. 'Cause for once, I wasn't thinking about what was right. I was thinking about what was real. That night, I didn't kiss him. He didn't ask me to. We just stood there. Hands clasped. Hearts open. Like maybe. Just maybe. We'd finally found the beginning of the story we weren't allowed to write. Not yet anyway. But soon. The first time Jonah kissed me. It was raining. Not the cinematic kind of rain. Not a warm summer drizzle where everything looks gold and soft. Well, it was cold, unforgiving February rain that soaked through your coat and chilled your bones. But I didn't feel any of it. Not when his hands were on my face. Not when his lips brushed mine like a question he'd been holding for years. He pulled back almost immediately. His wide. As if he had just broken something he could never fix. "I shouldn't have done that," he whispered. And I think my heart cracked a little. Because for the first time in a long time, I wanted something to be broken. I wanted the rules to fall apart. I wanted something messy, real, human. So I kissed him back. And that kiss, that second one, that was the one I'll remember when I'm old and full of stories. Because it tasted like every moment we'd ever swallowed down. Every look across a dinner table. Every quiet heartbeat we weren't allowed to hear. We didn't sleep together that night. Not even close. He drove me home, hands shaking on the wheel. We sat outside my apartment for a long time. No words. Just breathing. He told me he felt like he'd stolen something. I told him he didn't steal anything. Because no one ever claimed me. Not really. I had been sitting on a shelf, untouched, for years. But the guilt, it was there. Thick between us. Not mine. His. Because falling in love with your brother's ex-wife. That's the kind of betrayal people write angry family group texts about. That's the kind of thing that gets you disinvited from Christmas. Phil. We couldn't stop. I tried. I dated other people. A dentist who asked too many questions. A software engineer who couldn't make eye contact. A yoga instructor who told me I had closed-off hips during our second date. But no one was Jonah. No one made me feel known the way he did. We'd meet for lunch sometimes. Keep it casual. Public. Safe. He'd make me laugh so hard I'd snort coffee through my nose. He said that was his favorite sound in the world. Mine was the way he said my name. Like it belonged only to me. But every time we started to get close, he'd pull back. Guilt like a tether wrapped around his ankles. And I understood. I really did. He and my ex were close once. Not best friends. But brothers in the way boys are before women come between them. They played Little League together. Shared a bunk bed as kids. Got drunk at the same college parties. They weren't friends now. But there was still history. Still blood. And you don't just walk over blood without consequences. One night, he came over. Said he had something to tell me. I could see it all over his face. He was in pain. I told him, Jonah said. Voice low. Flat. Told who? Asked. Already knowing. Already terrified. My brother. I told him about us. As if there had been an us. As if we hadn't spent months dancing around a fire, afraid to burn. I didn't know what to say. My stomach dropped. My hands turned to ice. What did he say? Asked. Even though I didn't want the answer. Jonah sat down. Ran his hands through his hair. He said I was pathetic. That I always wanted what he had. That I was sick for even looking at you like that. He told me to never call him again. I didn't cry. Not then. Because part of me had always known this was inevitable. We were a fire waiting to be found. And now the whole house was smoking. But Jonah. He looked like a man who had just buried someone. I ruined everything, he whispered. And that's when I did cry. Because he thought he had ruined everything. When really, I had never had anything until him. We didn't speak for 3 weeks after that. Not a text. Not a call. Nothing. I went numb. Woke up. Worked. Came home. Stared at my ceiling until it blurred. I told myself it was better this way. That maybe love wasn't supposed to look like this. That maybe I was just lonely. Desperate. Craving attention like oxygen. But then, one afternoon, I saw him again. At the farmer's market. Of all places. He was standing by a table of peaches. Wearing that worn-out flannel I loved. Looking lost. He saw me. And for a second, neither of us moved. Then he walked over. Hands in his pockets. Is tired. But warm. Hi, he said. Simple. Tough. Like we were starting over. I didn't say anything. Just stood there. Fighting every instinct to throw my arms around him. I've been miserable, he said. In case you were wondering. It was. Every second of every day. He pulled something from his jacket. A small brown notebook. He handed it to me. I've been writing, he said. Letters mostly. To you. I didn't know what else to do with all of it. I took the notebook home. Read every word. He wrote about the first time he realized he loved me. It was the night I dropped a wine glass and started crying. Not because of the glass. But because my ex had called me dramatic again. Jonah said he wanted to crawl into the sadness with me. Hold it. Fix it. Turn it into art. He wrote about guilt. And that ridiculous peach cobbler I made once that tasted like glue. He remembered everything. I called him that night. Told him to come over. When he walked in, we didn't talk. We didn't make love. We just laid on the couch, holding each other, like we were building a new religion out of broken promises. And that was the beginning of us. Really, truly, it wasn't easy. His mother stopped speaking to him for months. Friends picked sides. Thanksgiving was a war zone. We were called selfish, sinful, stupid. But for the first time, I didn't care. Because I was in love. Not the movie kind. The real kind. The hard, messy, terrifying kind that you fight for. Every single day. We moved in together 6 months later. Nothing fancy. A little 2-bedroom with creaky floors and peeling paint. But it was ours. I started painting again. He built me a studio in the sunroom. Said he wanted me to have a place that was just for me. I cried when I saw it. He said, "Don't cry. Paint." So I did. We didn't talk about marriage. Not for a while. There was too much healing to do. Too many old wounds to clean. But one night, while brushing our teeth, he looked at me through the mirror and said, "You think maybe one day?" Smiled. Spit into the sink. Said yeah, one day. 'Cause this love, this strange, scandalous, beautiful love, wasn't a mistake. It wasn't betrayal. It was the first honest thing I'd done in a decade. There are moments in life when everything stops. Not dramatically. Not with sirens or screams. But quietly. Like a lake going still after a stone hits the surface. That was our wedding day. We didn't have a real wedding. No white dress. No violins. No audience. Just us. And a courthouse clerk named Marcia who offered us tic-tacs between vows. But the way he looked at me, like I was the only person in the world who had ever mattered, that made it sacred, holy even. I wore a dark green dress. He wore that same navy suit he'd worn to every wedding before. Except this time it was his. I wasn't supposed to end up with him. If you'd told me 5 years ago that I'd marry my ex-husband's brother, I would have laughed. Or cried. Probably both. 'Cause people don't do that. Not in polite families. Not in stories that end well. But we did. And it wasn't a rebellion. It wasn't a revenge plot. It was a choice. To love. To be loved. To take back the years we gave to people who only ever saw pieces of us. The aftermath was quieter than we expected. His mother didn't come. Didn't call. His father surprisingly did. He sent Jonah a message the night before. Just one line. "Your heart has always been bigger than your brother's. I hope she sees it." I cried when I read it. Not because it was approval, but because it was grace. And grace is a rare thing in a story like ours. The hardest part came 6 weeks later. At a grocery store of all places. Jonah spotted his brother, my ex, by the produce section. Just standing there, squeezing avocados like nothing ever happened. They hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years. Jonah froze. I watched him from a few steps behind. He looked like someone bracing for a car crash. You know it's coming. You just hope it doesn't break every bone. Then his brother turned around. Saw the rings. And I'll never forget the look on his face. Not angry. Not shocked. Just hollow. Like all the fight had drained out of him. He didn't speak to Jonah. Didn't speak to me. Just walked past like we were strangers in a city he no longer claimed. Jonah said nothing all the way home. Just drove with one hand on my thigh. Like he needed the contact to stay grounded. That night we sat in bed, lights off. Listening to the hum of the ceiling fan. And he whispered, "I still love him, you know. As a brother. Even after everything." I reached for his hand. Held it like an anchor. Said nothing. 'Cause sometimes love and loss sit side by side. Sometimes they share the same blood. Few months later I got a call. My ex had been in a car accident. Not serious, but enough to land him in the hospital. No wife to call. No girlfriend. Just my name, still listed as emergency contact. He never bothered to change it. I asked Jonah if he wanted me to go. He nodded. Didn't even hesitate. "You should," he said. "Closure doesn't always come in the package we expect." So I went. When I walked into that hospital room, I expected tension, drama, blame. But all he said was, "You look good." And I laughed. Because after everything, that's what he chose to say. We talked for 20 minutes. About nothing. The weather. Pain meds. The nurse who looked like Steve Carell. Then before I left, he looked at me. Really looked. And said, "I never made you happy, did I?" And I wanted to lie. To make it easier. But I didn't. "No," I said. "But I wanted to be happy. With you. For a long time." He nodded. Didn't apologize. Didn't get angry. Just said, "I always thought Jonah was the weak one. Turns out he was just braver." That was the last time we ever spoke. I told Jonah everything. He listened. Questions. then kissed my forehead like I'd just crossed a finish line. We moved again that summer. Somewhere warmer. A house with a lemon tree and creaky wooden floors. Jonah built me a reading nook by the window. Said I deserved soft corners to fall into. I started writing. Nothing grand. Just stories. About women who love boldly. And the men who almost miss them. People always ask, how did you get the courage to choose Jonah? And I tell them this. It wasn't courage. It was clarity. The kind that comes after you've lived in silence too long. The kind that whispers. This is your life. You get to decide how it ends. And I chose this. I chose the man who didn't see me as leftovers. Who didn't flinch at my past. Who walked into the fire, even knowing it might burn everything. Years from now, when I'm old and gray, sitting on a porch swing with a glass of wine, I'll tell some younger woman, maybe a niece, maybe a stranger, that love is rarely convenient. It's messy, uncomfortable, sometimes even scandalous. But when it's real, when it sees you, when it finds you after everything has fallen apart, you don't let it go. Even if the world says you shouldn't. Even if it means marrying your ex-husband's brother. Even if it means rewriting every rule you thought you knew. Because sometimes the wrong man's brother is the right man all along. And that is the kind of story worth telling.